The private conversation about you that shocked everyone. Listen carefully, because what was said about you in that private room was never meant to reach your ears. Yet heaven has permitted it to be revealed now. You felt it before you understood it. A sudden pressure in your spirit. A restlessness that arrived without explanation. That was not anxiety. That was awareness. A conversation unfolded about you behind closed doors, and it shifted the atmosphere so abruptly that even those who spoke your name were stunned by what followed. You were not the subject of gossip. You were the subject of concern. There was a moment, recent, precise, divinely timed, when your name was spoken in confidence. Not casually. Not dismissively. It was spoken with lowered voices and widened eyes. They did not expect the reaction that came next. They did not expect agreement. They did not expect resistance. And they certainly did not expect fear. Because when your name was mentioned, the room changed. Some leaned forward. Others pulled back. One person fell silent, not out of respect, but because something in them recognized a truth they were not ready to face. You have grown beyond the version of you they remember. And that realization struck them harder than they anticipated. This is why doors have closed without explanation. This is why certain people stopped calling. This is why opportunities rearranged themselves without apology. It was not coincidence, it was containment. They sensed you could no longer be managed, predicted, or quietly diminished. You see, when heaven begins to move someone forward, conversations happen before manifestations do. What shocked them was not what you've done, but what you're becoming. They spoke of your resilience when they expected weakness. They questioned how you endured what should have broken you. Someone even said, they should not still be standing after that. Yet here you are, clearer, steadier, more discerning than before. And that unsettled them. Because there was a time they believed they knew your limits. They thought they understood how far you would go, how much you could handle, when you would finally retreat. But the private conversation exposed something they can no longer deny: you are not retreating. You are advancing. What they didn't expect was the spiritual weight attached to your name. Not everyone in that room agreed. One voice tried to minimize you, to frame your progress as temporary or luck-based. But another voice interrupted, firm, unplanned, and said, no. There's something else with them now. This isn't random. That statement landed heavily. Because when someone begins to sense divine alignment on your life, it forces a reckoning. People must choose whether to align, oppose, or quietly exit. And many chose silence, because silence felt safer than exposure. You may have wondered why certain connections dissolved without conflict. Why there was no argument, no closure, just distance. Now you know. They heard something about you that made them reconsider their position. You are no longer safe to underestimate. This is why resistance has intensified even as clarity has increased. This is why distractions tried to pull you backward. This is why doubt whispered louder than usual. Those were not random attacks. They were reactions to the shift discussed in that room. But hear this clearly: nothing said against you was permitted to stop what has already been authorized. You were defended without being present. Your name was upheld without you needing to explain yourself. That is the sign of divine covering. When heaven speaks on your behalf, human conversations lose their power to define you. Still, there is more. Midway through that conversation, someone asked a question that changed everything. What if they're protected? No one answered immediately. Because everyone already knew. That pause, the hesitation, that was the shock. Not fear of you, but fear of touching what is guarded. They realized too late that certain lines should never be crossed, certain lives never interfered with once activation begins. And yours has begun. If this message resonates, stay with it. Let it anchor you. A simple like or quiet subscription keeps you connected to what's unfolding here, no pressure, just alignment. Because what they said next about you was never meant to happen so soon. And when you hear what was decided after that silence, you'll understand why your next season will leave even more people speechless. The silence after that question did not mean uncertainty. It meant recognition. In that private space, they realized something irreversible had already taken place in you. What shocked them most was not the protection itself, but the timing of it. You were not supposed to be this strong yet. You were not supposed to recover this quickly. You were not supposed to see so clearly while others around you remained confused. Yet you did. And that disturbed the balance they were comfortable with. Someone tried to change the subject. Someone laughed, forcing normalcy back into the room. But the conversation would not move on. Your name carried weight now, and weight bends every discussion around it. They began retracing moments, small interactions they once dismissed. The way you stopped explaining yourself. The way you withdrew your energy without drama. The way you chose silence where you once chose defense. That was the turning point they missed. Because when a soul stops needing validation, authority begins to form. One voice, careful, calculating, said something that revealed more than they intended. They don't react the way they used to. That was not an observation. That was concern. They had relied on your reactions to feel powerful. They had depended on your explanations to stay comfortable. But now, you were no longer feeding the old dynamics. And that terrified them. You see, people are rarely unsettled by your growth when it benefits them. They are unsettled when it removes their access. And access to you has been revoked without announcement. That is why the conversation grew tense. Another person admitted they tried to provoke you recently, just to see if you would respond. They expected emotion. They expected confusion. They expected you to defend yourself. But when nothing came back, the room grew quiet again. Because your restraint said more than any argument ever could. Restraint is not weakness. It is controlled power. What they could not understand was how you learned it without training, how you gained discernment without instruction, how you sensed when to speak and when to withdraw with such precision. They assumed wisdom came from influence. They did not consider divine refinement. Someone finally said it out loud. It's like they're being prepared for something. That sentence landed heavily. Because preparation implies assignment. And assignment implies authority. And authority threatens those who are still operating from control rather than calling. They began speculating, not about your past, but your future. Where you might go. Who you might align with. What doors might open that they will never have access to? The tone shifted from curiosity to urgency. They were no longer discussing who you were. They were discussing what you could become if left unchecked. That is when the conversation shocked everyone. One person, unexpected, usually silent, spoke with clarity that did not sound like their own. If they stay on this path, they won't be stoppable. No one disagreed. That agreement was the shock. Because agreement meant surrender. It meant recognition that the old strategies no longer worked on you. The manipulation, the delays, the subtle discouragement, they all failed. You walked through them without even realizing what they were meant to do. And that exposed something else. You were never meant to stay small enough to manage. They realized you were no longer reacting to the environment, you were shaping it. Even your absence changed the energy. Even your silence made people uneasy. That is not coincidence. That is presence. This is why you have felt watched without being followed. Why you sensed conversations you were not part of. Why you noticed shifts in behavior that were never explained. You were not imagining it. You were being recalculated. Because when someone grows beyond expectation, people must reassess their position around them. Some decided to step back quietly. Others considered aligning themselves with you before it was too late. And a few, only a few, considered resistance. But even they hesitated. Because resistance requires leverage. And you no longer offer any. You are not moved by praise. You are not shaken by criticism. You are not slowed by delay. That makes you dangerous to dysfunction. What unsettled them most was that you did not announce your change. You did not demand recognition. You did not seek permission. You simply became. That is the mark of true activation. And here is what you must understand now: conversations like this only happen when a threshold has been crossed. You have entered a phase where unseen decisions are being made around you. Some will work in your favor. Others will expose themselves through distance, silence, or sudden behavior shifts. Do not chase explanations. Do not seek clarity from people who are still processing your elevation. Clarity is coming from above, not around. If you feel drawn to stay connected here, a gentle like or subscription keeps the signal aligned, but only if it resonates. Nothing forced. Nothing rushed. Because the most shocking part of that conversation has not yet been revealed. What they decided to do next, after realizing they could no longer stop you, will explain why everything in your life is about to move faster than you expected. After that realization settled in the room, the tone shifted again, but this time, not toward fear. Toward urgency. They understood that ignoring you was no longer an option. Watching from a distance would not be enough. Something had to change, because when momentum builds quietly, it eventually becomes undeniable. And you are nearing that point. Someone asked, almost under their breath, "When did this happen?" Not as an accusation, more like disbelief. They replayed timelines in their minds, trying to pinpoint the moment you crossed over from overlooked to undeniable. They could not find it. That frustrated them. Because transformation that happens loudly can be tracked. But transformation that happens in silence feels supernatural. That is what unsettled them most. You were refined when no one was watching. Strengthened when no one applauded. Stabilized when no one checked on you. And now, they are forced to confront a version of you that no longer depends on the room's approval to stand tall within it. One voice, measured, strategic, suggested you might slow down. People like that usually burn out, they said. But even as the words left their mouth, something in the atmosphere rejected the idea. Because you are not driven by impulse. You are not rushing. You are moving with precision. Precision scares people who rely on chaos. They began to notice patterns they once ignored. How obstacles that should have delayed you somehow redirected you instead. How losses that should have weakened you sharpened your focus. How isolation that was meant to humble you actually clarified your purpose. You didn't just survive those seasons, you integrated them. That is when the conversation became uncomfortable. Because one person admitted something they had not planned to say. I think they're listening to something we can't hear. That statement lingered. It wasn't mystical to them, it was practical. They recognized that you were no longer responding to external noise. You were responding to inner instruction. And inner instruction cannot be argued with. That is when motives were exposed. Some realized they had underestimated you out of convenience. Others realized they had benefited from your uncertainty in the past. A few recognized that their authority around you had expired, and they were still trying to enforce it. But authority that has expired becomes control. And control never survives awakening. You see, when you stopped seeking permission, you didn't become rebellious, you became aligned. And alignment carries a confidence that doesn't need to announce itself. That quiet certainty was what made the room uneasy. You were no longer asking where you fit. You already knew. That changed everything. They spoke about your future carefully now, choosing words like trajectory and position and influence. They were no longer debating if you would rise. They were debating how soon, and whether they would still be relevant when it happened. One person finally asked the question everyone had been avoiding: what if they outgrow us? No one answered immediately. Because the answer was obvious. Yes. You will. And that realization caused a divide. Some felt threatened. Some felt inspired. Some felt exposed. Growth always reveals alignment, or the lack of it. And your growth is revealing far more than you realize. This is why certain people have begun acting differently around you. Why compliments feel delayed. Why support feels conditional. Why distance has increased without explanation. You are no longer predictable. And predictability is how insecure people feel safe. But understand this clearly. Your unpredictability is not chaos. It is discernment. You are no longer reacting from wounds. You are responding from wisdom. And wisdom does not rush to prove itself. It moves when instructed. That is why they cannot read your next move. You've noticed it yourself, the pause before you speak, the restraint before you act, the calm where there used to be urgency. That calm is not emptiness. It is authority settling in. And authority does not need validation. As the conversation continued, someone finally said what shocked them all the most: we can't interfere anymore. That was not defeat. That was acknowledgement. They realized that interference would backfire. That opposing you directly would expose them. That subtle manipulation would no longer work. You were too aware now. too grounded, too guided. So the conversation turned toward observation. Watching, waiting, adjusting. But here is what they do not know. You are not being prepared to remain observed. You are being prepared to move. If you feel this stirring in your spirit, remain attentive. Stay connected if it serves you, quietly, naturally. A soft like, a gentle subscription, only if aligned. Because the next conversation they have about you will not be private. And when it happens openly, you will understand why everything up to this point was only preparation. What they did not realize, what no one in that room could fully see yet, was that observation has an expiration date. Watching works only when movement is uncertain. But once direction is set, once alignment locks in, observation turns into irrelevance. And that is the phase you are quietly entering now. After the conversation shifted toward watching you, there was an unspoken assumption. That you would move slowly, that you would hesitate, that you would second-guess yourself the way you once did. They assumed time would dull your clarity. But time is sharpening it. What shocked them next was not something spoken, it was something felt. A pressure. A sense that something around you had already begun accelerating. They couldn't name it, but they sensed it. Momentum had started moving before they finished talking. That is what happens when heaven moves ahead of human consensus. You are no longer waiting for permission to step forward. Someone tried to reassure the room, saying, "They're still human. They'll slip." But that comfort fell flat. Because slipping is different from collapsing. And even if you stumble, you do not fall apart anymore. You recover faster. You recalibrate quicker. You move wiser. That is called maturation. And maturation makes old strategies obsolete. They began discussing contingencies. Ways to stay relevant around you, ways to position themselves so they wouldn't be left behind. Some considered offering support they never offered before. Others considered sudden kindness. A few considered alignment disguised as loyalty. But alignment that arrives late always reveals itself. You will notice it. The timing will feel off. The words will sound right, but the energy will not match. Trust that discernment. It was earned. Here is the truth they could not say out loud. You are entering a season where your presence alone will shift rooms. You will not need to announce yourself. You will not need to defend your path. People will adjust simply because you have arrived as yourself, unapologetic, aware, grounded. That is why the conversation ended sooner than expected. Because once people realize they can no longer influence the outcome, they stop talking. Silence becomes their way of coping with loss of control. You may have already felt this, messages left unanswered, invitations that stopped coming, conversations that suddenly went quiet. That is not rejection. That is recalibration. They are adjusting to a version of you that does not require access, approval, or constant explanation. And now, hear this carefully. As you move forward, support will come from unexpected places. Not louder. Not flashier. But purer. Quieter. More aligned. The kind of support that doesn't drain you, doesn't rush you, doesn't demand proof. If this message is strengthening you, one gentle way some choose to support this work is through the super thanks button, never required, never pressured. It simply helps keep messages like this flowing for those who are listening deeply. Others feel drawn to deeper alignment through membership, where consistent spiritual messages and focused guidance are shared for those ready to stay grounded during seasons of acceleration. Only if it resonates. Only if it serves you. Because your journey is not about consuming more, it's about integrating what already resonates. Back in that room, the final realization came quietly. Someone said, almost reluctantly, "They don't need us anymore." That was the final shock. Not because you rejected anyone, but because you outgrew dependency. And when dependency ends, power structures collapse on their own. You are no longer defined by who stands with you or who steps away. You are defined by alignment. And alignment attracts exactly what it needs, no more, no less. This is why the next phase of your life will feel cleaner. Fewer explanations. Fewer emotional negotiations. Fewer distractions masquerading as opportunities. You will sense quickly what belongs, and what doesn't. And when something doesn't belong, you will release it without guilt. That is not coldness. That is clarity. Understand this. People who talk about you privately do so because your future no longer belongs to the past they shared with you. They are trying to place you where they feel comfortable, but you are being positioned beyond their reach. And soon, very soon, the conversations will stop entirely. Because results speak louder than speculation. When that happens, you may remember this moment, the subtle shift, the quiet knowing, the internal steadiness that told you something irreversible had begun. That was not imagination. That was confirmation. Stay present. Stay discerning. Stay aligned. Because the next thing that unfolds will not just surprise them. It will force them to speak your name out loud, in places you never imagined. And what happens after that will mark the point where watching turns into witnessing. When witnessing begins, explanations are no longer necessary. Evidence replaces speculation. Presence replaces prediction. And that is where you are being led now. Into a season where outcomes speak before opinions can form. The shift will feel sudden to those watching, but it will not feel sudden to you. You have been sensing it in layers. First as discomfort. Then as restlessness. Then as an unshakable knowing that something was aligning beyond your control. That knowing was not anxiety. It was anticipation. Because what they discussed in private is now moving into public view. You may notice doors opening that were once sealed without explanation. Invitations arriving without effort. Recognition coming from directions you never pursued. Do not mistake this for luck. It is positioning. When preparation meets timing, movement accelerates naturally. Those who once spoke quietly about you will speak differently now. Some will revise their stories. Others will claim they always believed in you. A few will remain silent, not out of humility, but because acknowledgement would require accountability. Let them choose. Your role is not to correct narratives, it is to remain aligned. You will also notice something else. Your tolerance for noise will decrease. Drama will feel heavy. Justification will feel unnecessary. You will prefer clarity over comfort, even when clarity costs familiarity. That is not loss. That is refinement. As your path clears, your voice will carry further without getting louder. People will listen not because you demand attention, but because your presence feels anchored. That kind of influence cannot be manufactured. It can only be formed through seasons you never broadcast. This is why no one could predict you accurately. They did not see the nights you chose discipline over distraction. The moments you held your tongue when speaking would have felt justified. The times you obeyed inner instruction even when it contradicted logic. Those choices built something unmovable. Now, when you enter rooms, physical or symbolic, you will feel it immediately. The shift. The pause. The subtle recalibration. You will not need to interpret it. You will recognize it. And when people approach you differently, speak to you more carefully, or suddenly seek your perspective, do not be surprised. They are responding to the authority you carry, not the role you once played. Here is the final truth that was never spoken in that private conversation. They realized you are no longer waiting to be chosen. You are choosing. And choice is the clearest sign of empowerment. From this point forward, your decisions will shape outcomes faster than before. Not because you are forcing anything, but because alignment removes resistance. What once required effort will now require discernment instead. This is where many falter, not because they lack opportunity, but because they are not used to clarity. Stay grounded. Move deliberately. You do not need to rush what is already in motion. If you have felt supported by these messages and wish to stay connected as this season unfolds, there are quiet ways to do so, through simple engagement, or for those who desire consistent alignment and deeper grounding, membership offers that steady connection. Support given through super thanks, when chosen freely, helps sustain this space for others who are awakening into similar clarity. Nothing owed. Nothing demanded. Only alignment. As the final echo of that private conversation faded, one thought remained unspoken but understood by all. They are no longer ahead of you. That realization changed everything. Because from that moment on, every comparison became irrelevant. Every attempt to measure you by old standards collapsed. You were no longer running the same race. And now, you may feel it too, the quiet confidence, the absence of urgency, the readiness without impatience. That is not stagnation. That is arrival. The chapter ahead will not ask you to prove yourself. It will invite you to lead. Stay attentive to the subtle confirmations. Watch how ease replaces effort. Notice how clarity follows commitment. Trust the pace that feels natural, not pressured. Because the next time your name is spoken, there will be no whispers. Only acknowledgement. And when that happens, you will understand why everything unfolded exactly the way it did, and why the conversation that once shocked them was only the beginning.